Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome in. Give people just a second here. We still have a whole bunch of people joining the waiting room. All right, we seem to be tapering off here. Hello, everybody. Welcome in or welcome back if you've never been, if you've been here before and you're joining us again, welcome in if you're brand new. I'm Tiffany MacLennan. This is Focus Friday. We host these bi-weekly and basically just as a space to kind of get together, chat about what's happening in the higher ed sector, hear what's going on your campuses, learn some cool things, meet a new friend, drink a coffee, work hard on Friday afternoons as we do. Um, this is an interesting day we have ahead of us and an interesting conversation. And I bring to you an expert, if you will. I said to Alex earlier last week after our conversation in the community chat 2 weeks ago, I said, Alex, looking for someone who can, come and talk to us about provincial politics across Canada, maybe even province by province. Do you know anyone? And, I do happen to know someone. He happens to be my boss. Um, so he is here with us today to chat about provincial politics coming off of our conversation of 2 weeks ago. So if you weren't here 2 weeks ago, what we did was a little bit different than our usual run of show. So we had a little community chat 2 weeks ago, and we just used the opportunity to discuss what's been on people's minds, what has been, the most pressing topics that has been chatted about on your campus, and what do you think are going to be the most pressing questions in the year ahead? And that conversation ended up being a lot more about kind of provincial politics and how do provincial governments actually affect what we're working on a little bit more than I had anticipated in that conversation. So it seemed like a good time to kind of use the opportunity to springboard off that and chat about what the year ahead might look like as we navigate, tighter fiscal realities, competing priorities. Um, you all know the gambit. So, as I mentioned, I'm joined today by Alex. Alex is the president and CEO of HESA, Higher Education Strategy Associates, a avid commentor on everything that we're chatting about. Um, and we're going to chat about what we talked about 2 weeks ago, but also leading that into a piece that he wrote earlier this week on political cakeism. And if you're like me and you saw that word and thought, cake. Cool. What does that mean? The policy aspect of being able basically to have your cake and eat it too consistently and not navigating trade-offs. Um, so we're going to chat about what that looks like in practice. As you all know, we spend the first about half hour of this conversation where I will pelt Alex with questions. Then we'll open up the floor where you can pelt Alex with questions. We are more than happy for you to come off mute, ask your questions in the chat, whatever is most comfortable for you. And there will be a clear kind of turnover where you'll be able to ask questions. But without anything else, Alex, are you ready to
Go
hop
for it.
in?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. So Alex, you weren't here 2 weeks ago, so to give the context of what we ended up chatting about 2 weeks ago was, you know, suddenly,
Yeah.
seemingly,
Yeah.
governments appear to be a lot more interventionist, if you will, or directive with, what our university sector looks like. And that has been coming down into things like governance restructuring in different places, performance-based funding. Is this governments, do you think, abandoning cakeism, forcing institutions to try to make trade-offs for the first time, or are we just downloading the trade-offs onto someone else?
I would, the whole issue of government, let's just call it micromanagement for lack of a better term. I don't think it has a lot to do with cakeism, whether cakeism is in the ascendant or the descendant. I think the move towards greater provincial interference, if you will, is a very long-term phenomenon. It's not just I mean, unless you're in Nova Scotia, it's not just this year that you're noticing it. We have been consistently been pushing this way. I would argue for about 20 years. Probably until about 2008, there was I would argue that you had a center-left constituency in Canada that wanted to give money to institutions, but also wanted to tell them how to use it. And a right wing thing which was less interested in giving institutions money, but basically saying go with God, go figure out what you want to do. I think what's happened mostly is that universities have become so successful, post-secondary systems become so successful that they're now considered like utilities. Universities, they used to be special. They used to do things that nobody else could do. And so they could ask for special attention.
They were elite, if you will.
Yeah, hey, world class, right? But now when you get to the point where 80% of kids end up in university or college in the first year or two after university, it starts to look a lot more like the secondary sector. In fact, it starts to look more like a utility. Okay. Nobody talks about world-class utilities. The point of utilities is that they're there when you need them. And so even small interruptions in service, like uh, a brief occupation having to do with Gaza, people react really badly to that stuff. Student strikes, same thing. Um, Anytime, like it's never good news for cabinet when the sewer system makes the headlines, right? Like anybody in Calgary will tell you this, right? And so I think universities and colleges have kind of become the same way. Like they're not seen as, if you don't see them as assets, if you see them as cost centers, if you don't see them as special, you see them as just having to be there and just run, you get treated very differently by governments. I think, I mean, there is an element of cakeism. The big element of cakeism in higher education in the last couple of years has been international students, right? Governments could get away with not funding universities and colleges because the Indian middle class was doing it. Fantastic, right? How great is that when you get other countries to pay for our social services? That was amazing. That's cakeism in action. I don't have to do anything, and things get better. And universities and colleges were the same way. We get lots more money. And no, we don't really need to do anything about the housing supply. Forget it. No, we're going to have our cake and we're going to eat it too. We all thought that that was kind of a cost-free way of doing business. And that has fallen apart. So I would have said that the two areas are largely, they are both coming to roost in very significant ways in Canadian universities right now, but they probably come from different places.
Yeah, I think that leads well into a different conversation that we had, semi-related, is that, get to use your comparison to the sewers making the headline. If suddenly the sewer stopped working on, we decide to stop offering sewer service
Hmm.
to, let's say, King Street West over there, that's going to hit news headlines in not great
Hmm.
ways. And I
Hmm.
think that plays out at institutions as well. As soon as institutions say, we're going to stop doing X, that doesn't really go well all the time. And one of the things that we chatted about quite a bit 2 weeks ago was, the cultural and political challenges that come with institutions saying, we're going to stop doing X. And in particular, we're going to stop doing X to fund Y.
Mm.
So, I think, as you mentioned, we've seen that in a handful of ways this year, particularly driven by the changes in international student policies. Um, and I would say the most interesting way, or I guess the most news headline worthy way that it's come up has been things like program closures and
Yeah.
program reviews. So,
Hmm.
limiting what programs get postgraduate work visa permits, what at Nova Scotia doing program reviews, at Ontario rewriting their weighted grant units. How,
Maybe we'll see.
well, yeah, we'll see. We'll see. How are things like these government interventions making institutions kind of navigate trade-offs? Is that
Well, I mean,
a tool?
it's forcing a set of trade-offs on institutions. I think the question is really whether or not the institutions are up to doing them, right? I mean, I think in colleges where you don't have senates and where collective governance is not of the same type, basically, if I can put it that way, you've seen institutions make decisions quite rapidly. Now, maybe not as rapidly as they could have. I mean, I think we're going to see in Ontario, uh, nobody made all the closures they needed to make last year. I think
Yeah.
everybody kind of hoped there was some way back on international students that would meant they wouldn't need to make that second round of cuts. Algonquin just cut 25 programs yesterday, day before.
30. Yep.
Yeah, was that what it was? Okay. So I mean it's we're going to see that in a bunch of colleges where they held off for a year. Um, Universities have a lot more trouble making decisions about these things, right? Like they have created so many internal points of veto that it's almost impossible to close programs. Now, not that, and it's not even that. It's that even if you close the programs, it doesn't save any money because the way that people have drawn the rules around redundancies and faculty reductions means you can never get rid of effectively, the costs of getting rid of staff are so high that no one would ever do it. And so, yes, I think you are seeing, I think in the Ontario case, Ontario's just been lowering uh, domestic funding, whether it comes from tuition fees or them. They've been doing it and saying, let the universities work it out. And they haven't, right? Like they just haven't. And I think there's been very little, there has the level of structural change in universities has been very low, mostly because they could get away with it without international students, right? So it's only in the last 2 years they've been able to figure it out. Nova Scotia is kind of interesting, right? So Nova Scotia, I can't remember how many years ago it was now, but it was sort of 8, 10 years ago, brought in legislation that said, well, if a university is ever in trouble, it can restructure. But if before it restructure, and we, the provincial government, will give it protection and debtor protection and we'll suspend collective bargaining and blah, blah, blah. And the problem is that nobody did it. Like, actually, I think Nova Scotia actually believed that at least one institution, Acadia, would probably do it at some point. And they didn't. And so now they forced everybody to go through a very similar kind of process of it's not dissimilar from the fad we had about 15 years ago around program prioritization, but it is at least to make them start producing data on programs. Now, in Nova Scotia in particular, it's stupid as all hell because the data they want doesn't exist in most cases. They don't have a consistent definition of program. And I think, and the way they're running it in particular makes no sense for Dal because there's no obvious way to cut between graduate and undergraduate programs. Like it's a bananas process as far as I can tell. However, yes, I mean, give Nova Scotia this. They recognize that universities can't do this on their own, even when they want to. Okay. And I would say there are, well, I know of at least one on Nova Scotia University that actually did want the provincial government to make them do this. And secretly, there are probably two or three others that probably are not, they're not unhappy with being forced to produce data that looks at um, program sustainability. Let's put it that way. Now, whether that means you should cut the program, reduce intake or whatever you want to do, whatever you want to call it, that's a different question. But at least you need some data, right? So at that level, at least good on Nova Scotia. I think I've
In
stunned you into silence. That's
Yeah,
really
you
tough,
did.
Tiffany.
That's a
That
rare
doesn't
occurrence.
that
It's a rare occurrence. That is true. I like coming into that though, I think one of like the most interesting things to me is that my perception of things like these program reviews or things like the postgraduate work permit reductions for different programs is
yeah.
that, we're, I won't use were, governments and government entities are kind of saying, these are some clear winners. This is what sustainability is. And here are losers. Here's what we do not see as
Yeah.
financially viable. This is a lower priority for us.
Mm, yeah,
How
the feds don't care about financial viability. They're looking at labor market analyses, not very good ones, but they are looking at labor market analyses and saying this is where the country needs um, extra skills, and here's where it doesn't.
should institutions have been more responsible for that?
Hmm. Well, look, should they so you asked a second question there, which is more Nova Scotia related, which is should institutions pay more attention to which programs are financially sustainable? Yes, they should. Yeah, in my perfect world, you would have every institution would be doing that on a regular basis every year. It's this process by which we only do it when we are in trouble with money that makes people cynical about it, right? It becomes that actually caring about sustainability is just, that's just a budget issue. That's just an austerity issue. Instead of,
Mhm.
guys, we got to make money. We got to cover our budget here, right? And we can't have programs that have more staff than they have students. That's just dumb. And we have to, and we're going to, one of the ways we're going to do this by putting that data out there and making it public and everybody can understand. Because I would argue inside universities, one of the biggest things is actually everybody, like universities are supposed to be like really, looking out and knowing everything in the world. Most people in universities don't even understand how things work in the next faculty. And so, just really basic stuff like what's a course to a prof to student ratio, what's an acceptable level of research productivity. They don't even like those can differ quite a bit within a single institution. And you might then start to wonder why with those guys getting so much money and me who has higher student numbers and whatever else, why am I not getting that money? Those are discussions you want to have in institutions all the time. It's the set piece nature of the way we're doing this is we're doing it, oh, we're only doing it because the provincial government is forcing us to, or oh, we're only doing it because I don't know, there's collective bargaining coming up or whatever it happens to be. We just haven't been very good at explaining ourselves to ourselves, to be honest with you. And so, like I say, to the extent that something like this process might come out of the Nova Scotia process, right? Like whatever process Nova Scotia eventually figures out once they work out what they can actually do with the data available, is the institutions can keep publishing that data every year, and they actually have to have real discussions about it. And they're not, the sort of faux nonsense discussions you often get in academic planning and priorities meetings, right? It's like genuine. No, guys, this is it. This is the data. So, like I said, I think governments have been frustrated by this. I think, they think, here's where it's going to get tricky though, is I think governments think that once they publish this data, it will be completely obvious that these programs need to survive and these programs don't. And I think that's nonsense. I mean, first of all, local communities won't buy that. I mean, that was a point that you made. Um, and second of all, I don't think there's that big a difference in many between a lot of these programs. Like they actually all look pretty similar in some ways. So, anyways, it might not be a simple decision as the province imagines.
I'm thinking too, we had a podcast episode for those who listen to the World of Higher Education podcast. I believe it was Spain who kind of does an annual review and does some program revisions while they are not in a financial dire, if you will. So it was Pedro Tesquera, I want to say is his name.
Teixeira, Pedro,
Yes,
Portugal.
Portugal.
Pedro's
Thank
from
you.
Portugal. Yes.
Um, who like actually came in and had a really interesting example of here's how we are able, to kind of change our institutions
Yeah.
with some acceptance.
Yeah.
I'll link that in the chat for anyone who's interested to go listen to that. But the other thing I want to chat about flipping us a little bit away from government to governance, because
Hmm.
the other favorite topic, of course, that we all have. Um, as governments in particular, and I think we're seeing this pretty well in every province. We'll stop picking on Nova Scotia for a minute. I think we're seeing this across pretty well every province as governments move more and more to push institutions to, prove efficiency and prove effectiveness. One of the ways that we're seeing that kind of crop up is having governments add greater representations onto institutional boards, colleges, universities. Um, so my question for you, are
Again, I'm
boards,
pretty sure that's only Nova Scotia.
I think Alberta 3 years ago, Ontario a little bit
Alberta hasn't
now.
changed. Alberta hasn't changed that. So Alberta and BC, you've always had government majorities.
Mm,
What you may get are provinces being more active in telling their nominees on boards what to do. I mean, I think that would be a fair comment on what the UCP has been doing
yes.
in Alberta, but I'm not aware of anywhere other than Nova Scotia that's actually changed the composition of the boards.
Well, then I
And it's hard.
apologize.
It's
We will
hard to do.
continue to pick on Nova Scotia then.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, it's fine. It's fine. It's fun.
But I
It's a
think
good time.
that this leads into though my more general question. If you ignore the framing,
Yeah, yeah,
um, we'll use the UCP in Alberta.
yeah.
Um, are boards being repositioned more as a tool for having political accountability as opposed to their technical mandate of kind of having an institutional stewardship? What does that actually
Well,
mean when
it's
those
definitely
trade-offs
what's going
happen?
on. It's definitely what's going on in Alberta. There's no question about that. I don't see that really in any of the other Western provinces. I mean, you got to remember one of the differences between Canada and the rest of the world is that basically here, almost every institution has its own piece of legislation. You remember we had a discussion about that when we were talking about the autonomy index with Enora uh,
Benoit Prévost?
within yes, thank you from the EUA. And so I think part of what Nova Scotia is doing is they're saying it's ridiculous that we have some boards where there are no government representatives and some where there are half. Like that's crazy. We should just make this standard. And I got some sympathy from that, to be honest with you, right? I think there's a question about how many. I think there's a question about how often the communication comes. The weird thing is, like in Alberta, when the government wants something done, they don't call the university president, they call the board chair because that's their guy or their person. Um, it's a very different kind of atmosphere than the rest of the country. I think for various reasons, things have gotten a little tighter and more political, maybe in Newfoundland and Labrador as well, with the departure of the previous president and people getting really upset about the kind of chair that she um, was buying, which is one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen. Anyway,
And the
this
chocolate budget.
and the chocolate budget. I mean, come on. Anyway, um, I think regardless of whether the board is whether board members are named by governments or whether they are and the extent to which the government nominees are controlled by a government, I would have said that all boards are more into micromanaging now than they were 5, 6 years ago. I would say Laurentians scared the bejesus out of them. I think they realize, and then with the international students, like everybody is, feeling a little more mortal than they used to be. Nobody wants a disaster to happen on their watch. And so there's a tendency, because I hear this from presidents all the time. They're like, the micromanagement is out of control. And I hear that from people across the country. That's a real complaint in university governance right now, is the university, in a sense saying boards are stepping over the line between governance and managing. And a lot of it is around issues management too, right? Like the amount of board time that the anti Gaza or the Gaza movement had 2 summers ago or 2 springs ago was off the charts. I mean, universities were paralyzed by those, even where there weren't that many people in an encampment. It was just it ate up the board's time. It ate up everybody's attention. And the board freaked out about this stuff, and so they want to interfere and make, that's where they're going to make their mark. We'll get through it. I think everyone will come back across that line. So I don't think it's necessarily government. I think it's just everybody feels the pressure of being, of being a utility, and you got to be on all the time. And so they're much more frightened of those moments of interruption, and boards, whether government controlled or not, are responding to that. God,
I am,
I've got you silenced again.
I
This is
know.
two,
This is
twice in one.
this is what Alex and I do on a daily basis, if
Yeah, yeah,
anyone's wondering. I get to ping him with these questions all the time. But I think, okay, riddle me this.
yeah.
We have landed in this situation where, a lot of institutions had become overly dependent on international students to cover their
Mhm.
finances. We can argue that that
Yeah,
is solely
yeah,
because of government funding or, whatever the
whatever.
argument is. Were the boards not micromanaging then? Because is the financial
Mm.
stewardship of their institutions not quite literally the purpose of their being?
It's like when the stock market, like when the stock market goes up, like it's always positive, and when it's going down, it's volatile, right? It's actually just as volatile when it's going up as it's going down. We call it volatile when it's going down. And that's a lot of what I think happened here is, as long as there were no tough trade-offs to make, and that again, international students were for Canadian institutions, it was about avoiding making trade-offs. Wait, you mean we don't have to take a decision? That's fantastic. Awesome. Don't tell us more. I mean, the real failure for boards, I think, was, and management was there was insufficient imagination about how the train might come to a sudden halt. That was the governance failure. I mean, I remember 7 months. I think Ken was in the room, Ken Steele. I said to a meeting at Cowboy, I said, "Do any of you have plans for what happens when defate pulls the switch and tells you to stop?" This is a room of 200 people from universities and colleges. Not a single person had their hand up. Like nobody was ready. There was a governance failure there. There was a management failure, a huge one, and now we're overcompensating.
Keeping track of time, I do have four more questions for Alex, but I will make sure that we get open to our conversations. And then if people aren't chatty, we'll continue to ask him more. But we might
Give me
come
the
back
hard
to
one.
that, Alex.
What's the hard one? The hardest one you got left. Give me that one.
In the blog earlier this week, you wrote something along the lines of, institutions, and we'll use mine in the headlines,
Sure.
can do things like cut administrative positions, and
Yep.
that builds goodwill with government.
Yep.
It's showing that they can make trade-offs and they can do things. Do you think that actually convinces governments that institutions are able to have basically effective stewardship of public funding? And key, does that not erode public trust in institutions and sustainability, therefore making it almost harder to invest public money?
I'm not sure I understand the second part of that question.
Uh, in another framing, as you do things like shed workforce to cut
Yeah.
your administrative costs, and I think this is drastically more
Yeah.
imperative in smaller
Yeah.
regions
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
bigger.
Yeah.
Why would you continue to invest if you're really just
Oh, because
POing the
nobody,
entire community?
nobody, nobody thinks that the number of vice presidents you have is a symbol of your institutional virility, right? So if you can cut institutions and institutional vice presidents, and nobody's going to really get upset. I mean, Memorial cut what? They cut four VP positions, but then bolstered three, created new three kind of associate VP positions. Um, So they're not actually stopping doing things. They're just, they're making wider spans of control, I think. And this is fine, right? Like I think, how can I put this? If we're going back to per student levels of public expenditure that are like the late 1990s and late 2000s, universities and colleges have got to go back to looking like they did in the late 1990s and late 2000s and early 2000s. And that means
Describe that more.
it means fewer student services. It means fewer committees on various things. It means a smaller number of programs, and it means a smaller number of VPs. Go pick up a telephone book from any university from like 1996.
What
That's
are
probably,
those?
that's probably too, yeah, Friday. Some places still have them. But if you go back to 2001, you go back to 2006, there were simple universities and colleges were simpler places. They had fewer employees, they had fewer levels of employees, right? There fewer strata. I think part of the problem that we have, and I've made this point before, is that we have this tendency to try and keep doing everything we're doing, but with less. And that's just a dumb idea. We've got to go back to doing less. If we're going to be given less, then we do less. And less can mean lots of things. In Newfoundland, I firmly believe they should go back to be giving 3-year degrees. Why do 4-year degree? We didn't do 4-year degrees 40 years ago. We didn't do as many of them. Let's go back to having more 3-year degrees. Let's go back to in many institutions not trying to be research intensive. Let's go back in lots of institutions to having fewer student services staff. Like that's what it means. And so if that means fewer VPs, fantastic. And yes, governments do get convinced by that kind of stuff. It's very good. It's good PR.
It's a little terrifying.
Yep.
Yep. I think
I mean, they think you're also doing, you're going to keep doing everything else that you're doing, just with fewer managers. But that's another story. Yeah.
if you didn't listen to yesterday's podcast, it is actually fantastic. But Frank in particular, and he picked on Ontario a lot, which I can deeply appreciate. Um, you know, or you're talking about those trade-offs, you're talking about things like 3-year degrees, etc. None of our funding agreements kind of incentivize any of that change.
Yeah.
And you can make an argument that things like Ontario's performance-based funding model like started to lean into it a little bit. But
Mhm.
how do you, as an institutional leader, kind of navigate what the carrot trade-off is? If you only have
Yeah.
one carrot, how do you do anything else?
It's very, very hard, and that's why we have such a monoculture, right? I mean, I think that was the point that Frank was making. He was saying, look, if you want diverse institutions following diverse missions, you need lots of different types. If and you try to do it when the only carrot is research funding, you're not going to get a diverse ecosystem. You got to find ways to reward institutions for doing other things. And one way of doing it would be to put serious money behind the MYAs here in Ontario, which we don't do. Another would be to say, look, we're going to set up competitions. We're going to find out which is the most environmentally conscious university. We're going to find out which is the institution that really does most tech transfer in the community. And you start putting up in the same way that you have, I mean, yeah, it's a form of performance-based funding, but they're actually about serious multidimensional things rather than, twee uh, uh, single indicator kind of things, right? And they require judgment. They require people to sit down and say, are these universities doing a good job at X? I don't think you can capture it very easily with data, with small pieces of data. And that's the problem is government's too lazy to do the things that would make the system better. They want to be able to press a button and make it go. And that's really hard.